We crested the sand dune, and there it was in all of its immensity and its beauty, the Atlantic Ocean. I felt my daughter squeeze my hand a little tighter as we climbed the stairs up and over the dune in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. I was so excited. I was so eager to teach her how to play with the ocean, how to be strong in it, how to practice letting it play with her. This is one of my great joys in my life, and I was eager to share it. And tucked inside that excitement was fear. Those waves carry with them a deep fear for me, reminding every single molecule of my being about that one time I almost didn't emerge from the saltwater. That one time that I felt so tiny and so alone, all in its muscly dispassion. That one time where I, for some unknown reason, did not drown. Tucked within my excitement was fear. And tucked within my fear was excitement. And sparkling within all of that was bravery and a desire to not let this valid fear be the final answer. On our last day there, a 13-year-old boy did not come out of the ocean alive. The fear is real. Fear. We all, with practically no exceptions, experience fear. It is absolutely natural to the human condition, and yet it is also unique to every one of us. What I fear, you may not, and vice versa. How you experience fear may be different than how I experience fear of the exact same thing. And all of our fears are valid, because for whatever reason, we perceive a threat, even if others or ourselves don't understand why. And sparkling within all of that is your bravery. You are all so brave. A fear of heights comes from the fact that we can go splat. And yet, we have developed airplanes and roller coasters and ladders and synchronized Olympic diving 33 feet in the air. Have you seen this? A fear of being laughed at or mocked makes what I'm doing right now one of the biggest fears in American culture. A fear of being maimed or dying gives us fear of spiders or tigers or hippopotami or wolves, and yet we somehow leave our homes, and we do so without armor. I have a deep fear of singing in public. So, others do not. Others would have a great fear of playing the piano as a child in public. Others do not. And fear is not only just about our own physical safety. We commonly fear the loss of things, of people, of ideas. We may fear unexpected or unwanted changes. We may even fear the possibility of grief. Fears shift and change as we live, and yet are consistent and constant companions. We are all afraid. We all carry our fear everywhere we go. And we continue to show bravery. What are you afraid of? And how do you calm those storms? Fear has been present in the human animal long since we ever became a human animal. Our amygdala, the holder and processor of fear, and a little almond-shaped piece near the center of our brain, is often referred to as the reptilian part of our nervous system. And what that means is that all living things, or all animals, except insects and crustaceans, have a similar structure. So you don't have to feel bad about eating lobster or killing mosquitoes, apparently. But all this means that it comes from a shared ancestor deep in our evolutionary tree. And this means also that our shared spiritual ancestors, that we often call the disciples, also had an amygdala, and they also experienced fear. So let us take a deep breath together. And open our minds and our hearts and our ears to the story of fear from the account of Mark. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them into a boat. And there were other boats with them, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. So they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And waking up, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Be silent, be still." And then the wind ceased, and there was dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear again and said to one another, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Our spiritual ancestors were very afraid of the real possibility of a sunken boat. An unbothered Jesus stops the storm, and then they were again afraid because of this supernatural response. It is because of my own discomfort and admittedly, maybe even my own fear of this supernatural power that I have never engaged with this story before. I struggle what to do with stories of Jesus performing magical acts. But since this story comes to us at the end of a series of parables, I am going to approach this with a little bit of a parable-like quality. And this is counter to a frequent approach which says that Jesus can stop a storm and that our faith is insufficient unless we believe this to be true. And I don't know how to interpret that today. But I do understand being afraid. I can identify with the disciples being afraid of drowning. And I can understand being afraid of seeing something miraculous that I do not know how to interpret. A side note, a clarification. While they can feel similar in our bodies, fear is different than anxiety. The best way I've heard this described is that fear is when you see a roaring bear on its hind legs. Anxiety is when you feel that a bear can appear at any moment. Another distinction. Phobia, which is also different from fear, is when you refuse to leave your home because a bear might be out there somewhere. What are you afraid of, and how do you calm those storms? While fear is something that we can all understand and that we all hold in common, what is it really? We know that the amygdala in our brain is the center of our fear responses and processing, but that doesn't quite explain what makes fear, what sparks it. Why is it that one person can be afraid of something that others approach with calm and maybe even delight? Your clergy have no superpowers. Judy does not have, well, maybe Judy has a superpower, but none of us speaking publicly here are any more powerful than the most Americans that are afraid of doing this very thing. I am afraid of open water, and many of you may feel delight and freedom in swimming far away from the shore. A National Institute of Health article about the biology of fear names this complexity. It says, the functional approach to defining fear can be seen as seemingly circular. What is fear? The state evoked by a threat. What is a threat? That which creates fear. You are afraid because something scares you, and it scares you because you're afraid of it. Fear is both universal and individual. It is essentially human and as unique to each of us as we are to each other. And yet, we can identify with the disciples in the boat, and we can learn with them. What are you afraid of, and how do you calm those storms? When the disciples were afraid, they cried out. They named their fear, and they sought help. This might seem obvious, and it describes an act of bravery. They didn't freeze or leap overboard or fight with each other. They asked for help. They responded to their fear in a relatively rational way. Their amygdala didn't hijack them, which means an amygdala hijacking means when your amygdala takes control of your body to protect you from danger, activating your fight or flight response so you can protect yourself. This automatic response is deeply helpful to us. None of us would be sitting here today if our ancestors hadn't had this response system. And it has unintended consequences by contributing to PTSD and increased anxiety. So we don't know what these people in the boat did to avoid this fight, flight, or freeze response. But experts suggest that breathing deeply can help the more rational part of your brain re-engage and calm that amygdala's hijacking. And this can be incredibly difficult in moments of fear, but we are able to practice by focusing on our breathing in non-emergency times. We are capable of great bravery, my friends, and we get to practice it. And we need to. We need to. We have all spent the last many years, decades, being told to be afraid. Money and power have been extracted from our stoked fear. What damage has been done by this constant drumbeat of being told to be afraid of things. My amygdala is kind of tired. How about yours? There are undoubtedly things to be afraid of. It is natural. But what do we do about it? Do we continue to react? Or do we breathe and respond with love? How do we calm these storms and not fuel them? One of the most common phrases in the entirety of the book that we now call the Bible is some version of, "Do not be afraid. Fear not. Be not afraid." Now, I argue with the idea that we can be told not to be afraid. Fear is too human. But the underlying wisdom here is that fear is not the end of the story. God doesn't want us to stop at fear. Maybe a better, albeit too long and clunky, version of this phrase could be, go ahead and be afraid, name that fear, and then see what happens. Trust that fear is not the final answer. Fear is like our amygdala, an essential and life-saving part of our brain system, but it is not the entirety of our brain. We are much more capable than this reaction. Our modern-day griot, Maya Angelou, once wrote, "What is a fear of living? It is being preeminently afraid of dying. It is not doing what you came here to do out of timidity or spinelessness. The antidote is to take full responsibility for yourself, for the time you take up and the space you occupy. And if you don't know what you're here to do, then just do some good." The disciples encountered many, many moments of fear, most of which we will never know about. I mean, maybe Peter was afraid of spiders and they kept showing up in his bed. But what is described is that they experienced a fear of storms and drowning, angry leaders and crowds. They witnessed a crucifixion and an empire whose own fear meant that they were constantly living in danger. And yet they did not stop. We only sit here today because they were brave in the face of their fears. They were not unafraid, to be clear. They knew that fear was not the end because God's love was always with them. And as Ms. Angelou suggests, they did some good. They kept going and built the foundation of what we now call the church. Last week, our friend and pastor Dwayne reminded us that as inheritors of this church, we stand as an explicit rejection of hatred, of violence, and division, and witness a new way of living and being in the world. And that can take bravery. And we cannot do that if we let fear be its own end. What are you afraid of, and how do you calm that storm? What are you afraid of? And how do you calm that storm? Not being afraid is not an option. But we can breathe deeply, and we can look past these fears towards an outcome that may or may not be what we expect. We are brave every single day. We are brave alone, and we can be brave together. So, name your fears. Name your fears. Take a deep breath. Calm those amygdala storms and receive whatever comes next, whether it's expected or not. Be brave, for you are not the only one that is afraid. Be brave and keep going, remembering that God is waiting for us beyond our fears, waiting for the storms to calm, and we can respond with love and do some good. Amen.